Using emotions to generate energy. We're looking at emotional states in cycling. So strap yourself in because we're going to be moving pretty quickly. Okay, what is an emotion? We all experience them. They go from being angry to being worried to being bored to being guilty. Right down the other end, there's feeling sorry, surprised, suspicious, tired, anxious. So, what is it about emotions? Why do we experience them? What's their function? Are they any good? We know they have an intense effect. How do we use that intense effect? So let's look a little bit more at the nature of emotion to get some understanding of what they're all about. Well, one way to classify emotions, to see them, is to see them in terms of their activation. Some emotions really seem to make you feel energetic. They want to move, being scared, being angry, being anxious, being scared of something make you want to run away, being angry make you want to start a fight, surprised, excited. We get excited on Christmas Day and we eagerly unwrap our presents. Low activation, feeling downhearted, not wanting to get out of bed, feeling sadness, not wanting to do anything, feeling miserable, feeling on your own, all things that make you want to conserve energy. And then there's things like feeling pleasant, wanting to relax, lie on the beach on a happy day. So they go in high activation, low activation, and on one side they're pleasant, happiness, excited, surprised, and the other side they're unpleasant, things like fear, anger, and anxiety. So two different ways to look at it: activation, high activation, low activation, pleasant, unpleasant, and that helps to understand whether they're any good or not, whether we want to increase the intensity of one type of emotion, reduce the intensity of another one in relation to what we're going to be doing. So let's put this in the context of cycling. We get anxious in lots of parts of a cycling event, but particularly at the start of an event. How are you going to go? Am I prepared? These are absolutely normal thoughts to have. Anxiety at the start of competition is absolutely normal. Most people have it. Even the most experienced athletes have it. The elite level athletes get nervous at the start of competitions because sport is by its very, very nature uncertain. We don't really know how well we're going to go until the competition starts, until we start executing the plans we made in training and how they're going in the competition, and we make all sorts of judgments about how that's going to be going. So if we get very anxious, that can lead to us people going very, very fast at the start. And we did a nice little study where we got people to be quite anxious. We increased their anxiety, and at the start, what they did is they rushed out miles too quickly. So the first lap was really, really quickly, and that led to exceptionally intense perceived exertion. We get anxious when we're going very, very quickly. That's might not be a bad thing. Might not be a bad thing because it means we might be attending to things going on around. We get anxious when we can't do things. So we might rock up to a huge, great hill and hoping that we have the gears in order to be able to smoothly ascend the hill. And what we don't want to be doing is rocking and rolling across the side of the road like our picture of the person at the top, where he's now starting to zigzag up the road. Never mind the fatigue of cycling up a hill, that comes with the fatigue of falling over, slap bang crash with everybody watching. We know with intense fatigue come intense emotions. We absolutely know that, and we know that people who are good at managing their emotions also tend to interpret fatigue in a far more positive way. But when you get very tired and that's emotions will kick in, when you've got a really important goal you're absolutely striving for, the emotions such as anger, this is not good enough, will kick in because fatigue will be signaling you to stop. Yes, the fatigue is a function of the intense exercise, but the anger that comes with it, the negative thoughts that may well be driving you to feel depressed, angry, and depressed, and therefore want to stop, is not very motivating. It's not very helpful. You're always going to get the fatigue if you push really hard. That's an absolute function of pushing to the maximum. But whether you want the anger or not is a debatable matter. But emotions can influence performance. Emotions can make difficult decisions on how to pace a race. Emotions can influence whether you choose to attack or defend, and whether that's appropriate choice. If we already looked at, say, anxiety, that may lead to going off too quick at the start. Well, you may misinterpret a decisions of others and go really quickly in a group ride, and find it really difficult to then hang on near the end because you've expended too much energy in the early stages. And emotions influence your perception of fatigue. And so in today's talk, I'm looking at the question of using emotions to generate energy. Emotions, do they help? Harm? Do you want to feel greater intensity of one, less intensity of the other? And we will look at interventions we can use to help us feel better, how we want to feel, importantly. And actually, better, as we will see, is an individually determined psychological state, and therefore help us perform better. I'm going to conclude by saying the best bit at the start is that emotions might catalyse processes that provide extra energy for movement. People can get better at regulating their emotions, and there are lots of ways of doing this. And finding out the best method for you, practicing it in training, having it there in your toolkit, within your mind, being able to use it when you want, is absolutely vital. We'll get into some definitions. There's nothing more practical than a good theory, is what us academics like to say, but it's absolutely true, because what theories do is explain the concepts, and from those theories they explain how one relationship relates to another, and therefore we get a series of predictable events. Lovely phrase, elite performance, best performance is not an accident. It's a planned process where you do one thing, training in a certain way, and that delivers the performance you want to achieve, the goals you want to, work at the intensity you want to. So we want to work with theory. So we define emotion. Emotions are about something. You get angry. You don't just get angry in a vague, undirected way. You get angry about something. All emotions carry this characteristic. A feature of emotion is that should be some identifiable cause, or a set of thoughts that run along in the background, so that you can explore what the causes of that emotion were all about. Emotions make you feel good or bad in some way. They're not neutral states. They're not. So there's a level of intensity about them. There's a pleasant, unpleasant, but they make you feel good or bad about. And really important part is that emotions wax and wane. They change over time. If you're feeling angry, that anger will pass over time. Anger is an intense. The reason that you recognize the anger different from your normal state is that it will pass over time. Emotions have three components, and this is helpful in our terms of the exploration of emotions in relation to whether they raise energy or not. Is that there is a physiological response. The high activation emotions come along with a change in our physiology, our respiration, our heart rate. The signal of those emotions is preparation for action, and our physiological state is getting ready for that action. Emotions will reprioritize our perceptual and analytical processes. Getting anxious will make us search the causes of that anxiety, search for what's going on in our environment. Anxiety will have a massive effect on our attention. Anger equally has a massive effect on our attention. Typically makes us act in a way that might make us bolder than what we'd like to at the time, but in a sense provide us with energy to maybe attack that source of that frustration, which might be quite functional. Getting angry sometimes might be quite functional. Using the anger in a way that allows you to overcome sensations of fatigue clearly is quite functional if the goal is to ride up a hill as fast as possible. Behavioural, whether we want to approach or avoid, and I've alluded to those just now in a moment. Important part about the nature of emotion, the evolution of emotion, that they have lasted. They have lasted. Nature hasn't selected them out in that all have a function, they all have uses. So we'll go through some of those uses. So when anger might be helpful? Well, anger will provide a signal that you're frustrated against your goals, and so the response to getting angry might well be to increase your effort. Certainly, anger directs your attention, it primes your physiology, and provides you with the means of which you can try harder, and that effort will be the physiological state that comes with that anger will help manage that increased intensity. But effort has to lead to better performance. So simply trying harder, possibly having a negative effect on your concentration because you're focusing on the wrong things, has to be overcompensated because increased effort will lead to better performance. Anger might be quite harmful when pushing harder is not good enough, and we'll see an example of that from a study where we manipulated feedback so riders were behind their goal. We lied to them. We told them that they got to 2 miles and they'd actually done 25 miles an hour, but we said they'd only done 23 miles an hour, so that they got a bit frustrated that they weren't performing to expectation. And they got really negative, really unpleasant emotions. And what that led to was then an erratic strategy for smashing down hard on the pedals. The graph at the top are power spikes. So as they try to get back onto their goals, they really pushed hard to get these big surges in power, and a huge increase in fatigue, lactic acid, increased heart rate, and it was really quite a negative, difficult, unpleasant physical state and emotional state. But it didn't lead to improved performance, and so therefore the anger wasn't being functional. So one of the functions of anxiety is to signal to pay attention to the cause of the anxiety. So descending down a hill might be quite useful to feel anxious, because it means we'll pay attention to the situational characteristics, looking out for things in the road, how to take bends and so on. Getting anxious will narrow our attention, and that can be quite helpful. And anxiety generates intense arousal, and that might be quite useful if we do a sprint finish, for example. When anxiety can be harmful is that we pay attention to the causes of anxiety, and we're not paying attention to what we need to deliver to the best performance. And that makes it very similar, doesn't it, to when it's harmful and when it's helpful. But it does depend on what the shift in our attention is in relation to the arousal that it generates. It's why, really, when we get to it, being able to change the intensity of anxiety in relation to the task is really not important. Anxiety can cause or can lead to poor decision making, going too quickly and then not being able to respond to attack. So making an unnecessary attack because you think that this is what you need to do in order to do your best possible in the race, because you're nervous about what the other competitors will do. But then in the end, they sit behind you drafting, and then when it comes to the critical part in the race, because you might be leading for 90% of it, but the one who wins is the one who's the first at the end, and therefore you get dropped at the end of it, and it might be because you were nervous and expend a lot of energy going on. And we've demonstrated this in lots of studies where we've increased anxiety, looked at its effect on people's decision making and performance, and found that it's not optimal. It's not the preferred strategy for that individual, but they were led by their anxiety. When depression harms, and this is massive amount of evidence for the effect of depression on motivation. That depression really squashes your motivation when things get really tough. In other words, you're feeling very fatigued, feeling very fatigued and very sad. Can be a very negative, unpleasant emotional state that makes you want to stop, conserve energy. You know, the function of depression in terms of evolution is to help protect the individual. Depression helps people survive. Conserving, when you haven't got much energy left, when you're very tired, very hungry, is a way of preserving your life. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's only a bad thing if your goal is to go as fast as possible. So you don't do as well as you'd like. So you want to be change. It's not always unhelpful. Lovely bit of work we did with supporting some athletes in the Ride Across America a few years ago. They started off pretty okay, pretty functional, and graph below, they were in their functional emotional state right at the start. As they got more fatigued, they got more miserable, they got more depressed, but they still managed to maintain a certain strategy. So the idea that they recognised that they were feeling pretty low, but decided to uh, increase their effort as a strategy to try and change their emotions. So cheer ourselves up by performing better, and it maintained performance, but it came at a cost in terms of they felt pretty tired. So feeling happy helps. Feeling happiness helps when the race is going well, and it says all is well in the world. Anxiety signals all is well in the world. Yes, all is well. It's great. So carry on doing what you're doing. But happiness is not always unhelpful. Happiness can lead to underestimating the demands of the task, being very happy, descending a very steep hill, going, yeah, it's going to whiz down here. It's only good if you've got all of those situational factors completely under control. If you suddenly have to narrow your attention, and happiness might not be the emotional state to best suit that, because it's a very a very open, spread out, attentional style, and therefore it may not be quite maybe that beneficial. Feeling excited, yep, we can pretty much relate to that in a high intensity test like cycling. So the idea that feeling excited, feeling energetic, holding a pace, sprinting, riding up a hill, feeling pumped, so many parts of cycling will seem to lend themselves to those feelings. What we should recognise, though, is that intense exercise, hard exercise, the almost inevitable consequences of that is that it will reduce sensations of feeling energetic, it will reduce sensations of feeling happy, because the evolved function of human psyche is to keep the individual alive, and what emotions serve as is a way of informing the individual that what you're doing is unsustainable. Intense, a short duration for a reason. They provide energy and activation into the system for a short period of time. That's for a reason. If the individual's goal is to persist at a high intensity for a long period of time, if that involves them pushing to what is the edge of their physical resources, so working with in a state of high pain, due to the intensity of the exercise, emotions kick in to serve to inform the individual this is not sustainable. The person has to override that and says, yes, I recognise that, Mr. Emotion, you're telling me this isn't very nice, but I actually want to try and achieve the goal at the end of it, and I will get pleasant emotion at the end of it, so I'll prepare to put up with this miserable state in the meantime. So you have to accept that's what is going to be the course of the event. Feeling excited is not always useful when you have to be very analytical, very calm. If you're playing chess, for example, you might not be too excited. You need to think very carefully. There is a theory of that feeling depressed is very good for analytical thinking, because you try to work out very closely what's going on in the world around you. In other words, feeling low in activation and very high in unpleasant emotions, as opposed to feeling very pleasant and positive emotions. Okay, that's all well and good. So if you work out what your best and worst emotional state is in relation to performance, you need to work out how that links into how you want to perform. And with the cycling, you can start planning in that stage. So what is your pacing strategy? Are you going to be bursting out in starts and stops of intense efforts, which can be entirely functional to your style of racing? It might that be what might produce you best performance, but in which case, feeling being able to drive intense, short duration, high activation emotions for a brief period of time may well be functional. When in those races do you need to feel aroused and energized, and when do you want to feel calm? If your racing strategy is to be very tactical, to sit behind someone, make good decisions, not jump around with the gears, be smooth up the hills, and feeling calm might be the optimal psychological strategy. You might want to feel aroused right at the end, but that means you're calm and then you're feeling aroused at the end. So you learn to try and identify the best emotional state in the appropriate. So how can we use emotion to help us go quicker? Well, we absolutely know that psychological skills training, such as imagery, such as self-talk, such as using strategies called implementation intentions or if-then plans, such as concentration training, prepare us to be able to go faster. They give us a clear idea of what we need to be doing. They give us a clear idea of thinking through the parts of performance, what we need to deliver to actually go quicker. So attentional control training, thinking about what you're going to be doing. So you're concentrating at the right part of performance at the right time in the event. And what we have done in our group over the last 10 years, have done studies to look at the effect of different psychological skills on performance. And we'll touch on some of those as we go through the next few slides. Our most famous and the most exciting one, which fills me with such great pride to talk about, because it was and still is such an overwhelmingly interesting project, was one we did with BBC Lab UK, which we worked in conjunction with the Olympian Michael Johnson, who was a key agent in the delivery of our intervention, because this was an online study of which he narrated the videos. So in other words, told people what interventions they're going to be doing, and told them about the task, psyched them up, calmed them down, and at the end of it provided the most fabulous feedback. And this was published recently in Frontiers, which is also a really nice way of publishing your work, because it's open access, so we can see the number of thousand people who've read our work, which is a really nice thing for authors to do, to see that their work is being read by people, other than their wives, of course. So this is the project. Can you compete under pressure? The idea was we set up a task, which was an experimental task for people to do sitting at their computer. So the idea that we were going to learn to regulate emotions outside of competition in a safe environment where we can test the effects of different interventions. And we wanted to develop a task where people were put under a bit of pressure. So we did a competitive test where people had to find numbers, and they had to find numbers against an opponent. There was music in the background that created a building drama effect, narrated by Michael Johnson to create a sense of importance, and Michael, absolutely fabulous acting in how that was generated, and hosted off a national television company, presented on the One Show, which is a 15 million people launched, where 15 million people viewed the launch of the experiment, and over 100,000 people did. So we did different interventions. We actually had 12 different interventions. We had interventions called if-then planning, the idea of preparing for something quite negative with a solution. So if I lose concentration, then I will concentrate on, and then whatever the advice was, it might be motivational to beat the opponent. It might be about the process, to think about doing to increase your effort and perform as best as possible. We looked at self-talk, the idea of changing your thoughts in a positive way, and we looked at visualization. So what people did is that they were put into one of 13 different groups, one being a control group where Michael just offers encouragement, and they completed an emotional scale, did the performance several times. The intervention was introduced in the middle, and so therefore it allowed us to test the effects of compare the effects of the intervention against the control condition. So we did different interventions. We actually had 12 different interventions. We had interventions called if-then planning, the idea of preparing for something quite negative with a solution. So if I lose concentration, then I will concentrate on, and then whatever the advice was, it might be motivational to beat the opponent. It might be about the process, to think about doing to increase your effort and perform as best as possible. We looked at self-talk, the idea of changing your thoughts in a positive way, and we looked at visualization. So what people did is that They were put into one of 13 different groups, one being a control group where Michael just offers encouragement, and they completed an emotional scale, did the performance several times. The intervention was introduced in the middle, and so therefore it allowed us to test the effects of compare the effects of the intervention against the control condition. Let's look at those interventions slightly in a bit more detail. So taking self-talk, the most simplest to use quite clearly. So self-talk as a process goal is I can react quicker this time. So it's about the mechanics of what you're doing. Self-talk against an outcome. I can beat my score, so focused against something objective, what previously happened. Self-talk about arousal control. I will stay calm. So I recognise it's the emotional state I want to be in and I will stay calm. And instruction about skills. I will focus completely on the number I find. Those process, outcome, arousal, instruction generate downwards by the different technique. So imagery process is the same, an emphasis as self-talk, but delivered by imagery. If then planning, if I start worrying about my mistakes, then I will say to myself, good performance last time, I can do it again. And the idea is, if this happens, then I'll do this. The control being just some general statements about you played it before, give yourself a go next. What we found, as we'd expect with practice, that people got better at it, but what we also found quite nicely in terms of our link with emotions is that effort was a massively strong predictor of performance. Those who increased their effort performed quicker. So which interventions changed your emotions and which interventions led to better performance? So what we found is that imagery outcome, imagery process, self-talk outcome, those orange bars at the start had the biggest effect size. They increased our emotions to be feeling more energetic, feeling happier, and they're associated with faster performance, finding numbers much quicker. So they were the most effective. Interventions learned really quickly to generate arousal, to generate effort, to perform better. Look at those in a bit more detail. So imagery outcome, picture yourself playing the game, beating your opponents, beating your best score. So the idea that you identify success and you rehearse yourself delivering that success. Really important way of looking at it. Imagery process, picture yourself playing the game, playing at high intensity, playing quicker than you did before. Self-talk, I can beat my best score. So the idea you identify the target and you're driving your efforts to overcome that target. Very arousal focused, very effort focused, improved performance. So how would we contextualize that into cycling? What we learn from that is to set the goal. What do you want to do? How do you want to think? How do you want to feel? Set the goal around the emotional states, the cognitive states, what you're thinking about, at the part of the event where you think it's most important. Identify the strategy that will bring about that skill. So if you're into using imagery, then use imagery too. So see yourself cycling. One of the techniques I usually do is ask cyclists to imagine their feet as like a steam engine. And this unstoppable force, and they imagine their feet as a steam engine, and that helps them ride in a more smoother way. Talk about self-talk, the process, about focusing on what you're doing, now feeling nice and relaxed, fast feet, getting into a rhythm. I personally am quite big on rhythm. We've done this in running, we've done this in cycling. The idea that you try to imagine states of rhythm in running. We can use music in training. In cycling, we can have counting, but the idea that you perform as smoothly as possible, as relaxed as possible, and the idea that you reduce tension from the parts of the body that simply don't need tension, shoulders. And you can practice these interventions in training. Just on training, there's ways to practice psychological skills. One is away from training, just as I described. The Can You Compete study is a lovely example where you can set up a simple task, do psychological skills to get yourself better at that. The task doesn't really that matter. It's about how you use psychological skills to deliver planned best performance, change your emotions to the state that you want to do, get yourself excited, get yourself aroused. Does it lead to performing better? If the task is important, you can generate emotions around that. So if you want to feel anxiety, then you can perform something in public that will definitely get you anxious, where everyone's judging you. You can then learn to manage your emotions around that. In terms of reflection and analysis, in terms of performance, I quite like using Strava and those online packages to be able to go through someone's ride with them and help them identify which parts of the ride that they need to change their thinking strategy. So do you want to push harder on that part, easier on that part? When was the parts where it's going to be slightly, when you rest, where would be intense emotions be quite useful? Where are they not so useful? Where is it useful planned? And where you get useful planned, so you know you're going to have a big hill and therefore driving the arousal up for that big hill, you can then look for the signals. So you might be a mile away. So when do you start thinking through the strategy for getting ready for the hill? And so at that point, going into the hill, you are psyched up, ready to deliver that performance in the best way possible. What I also really like, and I think this is really important in terms of from a practical tip, is to use psychological skills training within sessions. And best having done them in sort of closed, in a simple closed environment, away from competition, where it's less risky, because obviously in cycling it's quite there are dangers, um, safety, etc. But what we do know, and we can play with this, is that intense exercise generates unpleasant emotions. So if you want to learn to manage unpleasant emotions, then intense exercise is a way of, you will get those unpleasant emotions from doing intense intervals. So interval sessions will generate intense feelings of fatigue. With following intense feelings of fatigue will come unpleasant emotions. So do them. Do interval training. Short, hard interval training will produce those physiological effects, will produce that psychological effect, in which you can then practice how you rephrase, reinterpret those physiological states, so that the phrase is, can I push myself? Yeah, I can. It makes me feel tougher. What I also like about repeated interval sessions is that every time you say, yes, I can do this, every time, yes, I can push myself through this, you get a big tick in the mental toughness box. And that is really important. Why? Just on a matter of when you can do this, what a massive increase in the indoor cycling and things like Zwift. What a fabulous way of getting people to be able to ride in a safe environment, do interval sessions, do group rides, to get the social benefits of cycling in a totally safe environment. Now, it's much better to go outside, but if you can't go outside because you work, your lifestyle, you've got young children, this actually allows connections. I really think that is a really great idea. So in conclusions, what I would say is identify emotional states you want to feel and when, and you can do that by using things like Strava, replaying your event, going through races, saying I'd like to feel calm at this part, being angry at this part might have been quite useful, being anxious at this part might have been quite useful. It might have been, I want to feel calm the whole way, excited the whole way. You identify the emotional state, which how you want to feel, so you know what that plan is around performance. You develop strategies, things like imagery, self-talk, you practice them so that they are in your toolkit, and you learn how they regulate your emotions. And then you need to be aware of that emotions will change during intense exercise. So in terms of, if you're going quite hard, expect to feel unpleasant emotions with intense fatigue. That's part of the deal. Don't worry about it. Learn to like it, learn to love it. Change your narrative going on as you're experiencing. And then when you're busting at the top end, that's it. That feels okay. You wouldn't expect to ride up a huge, great hill, 1 in 3, without feeling a little bit of burn in your legs. In the same way, don't expect to feel a little bit cheesed off when you're pushing as hard as possible, but just as you'd be prepared to overcome the burning in your legs, be prepared to overcome some of the unpleasant emotions that go through your mind. They're simply telling you you're working hard, and you simply go, yeah, and you go, yeah, that's fine. I will work with you. So that's where you can get in hold of me. Most of my research is on ResearchGate. I think it's a great tool. That is a great tool. You can ask questions and we can have chats. I have a website called winninglane.com where I put stuff up. I have a YouTube channel. Just type in Andy Lane on YouTube and up I come. and I put lots of self-help videos on emotional training. Most of those can be linked off from the website too. And I'm available on Twitter, AndyLane27. Why 27? Clearly Andy Lane 1 had gone by then, and Andy Lane 27 because for the last 22 years I have remained 27 years old. Um, uh, Sometimes we have to change our inner dialogue even to make ourselves feel happy. That's me. I hope you enjoyed that presentation.